Hello everybody. So in my last Instagram post I showed some pictures of some popular Japanese swim baits that I was using or that I created with some molds, and actually one of the last YouTube video we did, or that I did, actually was a little halibut caught in the harbor on one of these little guys. So what I wanted to do is show a how-to video on how I started making the molds for full-bodied swim baits. I know the last video, the last how-to with the plaster was for flat top swim baits that aren't full body but just had a flat top, so it was simply pour into the mold, pour into the plaster, and then sit that on top, sink it down, let it dry, and then you could pour your hot plastic in there and you were done. Well, with these, it's a little more complicated because they're full body. They're not a flat top, so I'm going to show you how we do that. But first, before I go into that, as you see, I have Legos in front of me, and so what I was coming across is having difficulty finding different size trays for the different size lures and molds I wanted to make. And so I was going through the house, looking through a bunch of different things, and came across Legos. Legos, with being solid plastic, the plaster doesn't stick to them, so that's obviously a win. And also with Legos, that it was kind of an aha moment, was you can add or take away pieces, and so you can very easily make your molds larger lengthwise, or wider, or even taller. And so even the first mold I made with them, I was sold on it. It was awesome. It worked perfect. And so that's one of the main differences you see here is I'm using Legos. Now for the bottom, since there is no bottom, with a tray, TV tray or dinner tray or food tray, whatever, you obviously have the bottom and you don't have to worry about it. But with Legos, there is no bottom, so you can either clamp a hardboard to the bottom, which if you want to make it look absolutely amazing on the bottom, go for it. Me, on the other hand, I don't care what the bottom of the mold looks like, so all I simply do is take duct tape, 4 strips of duct tape, and put them tight across the bottom. Doesn't have to be perfect, just has to make sure that it's stuck to the corners on underneath side. And this is going to be your bottom of the mold. Again, doesn't need to look beautiful, doesn't need to be perfect, just needs to be functional. Cheap, easy, fast. Okay. And voila. We are completely done with the bottom of the mold. Now flip it over, and you could see how the tape isn't quite stuck to each other, so I just take my finger and push that tape layers down, and now they're stuck. Push it down a little bit, make sure that tape is secure, and boom, simple. Within a few seconds you have the bottom of your mold. Now before I actually get into pouring the plaster, I wanted to note, as I noted before, with the other swim baits with the flat top, you simply pour the plaster in, then you take your lure, and as I did, stuck the tail in first and put the body in second and let that dry, and then you take your hot plastic when you're done, pour it in, let it dry, boom, you have your lures. With the full-bodied one, it's I shouldn't say much more complicated, but it's definitely more complicated. I started with the number of fails that I had. I started by putting the lure in straight down. What I found is that after I poured the plastic in, this piece or these tails are so thin and there's not much plastic there, you go to pull it out and it was just getting stuck in there and it'd break the tail off. Tried to flip it over this way, same thing on the top. Tails were too thin, it would break right off. I failed about 6 or 7 different molds, couldn't quite figure it out. And then I started looking at a lot of the aluminum cast CNC aluminum molds that I see online, and it dawned on me that they are actually made with the lure sideways. And so I tried it and it absolutely worked perfect. But what it does is it makes it to where the plastic there isn't a lot of plastic, a lot of depth in the mold by turning it sideways. You see length, when it's up like this, there's a lot of plastic going down. However, when you turn it sideways, it's very little. There's equal amounts of plastic on the top piece of the mold and even plastic on the bottom. And so it makes it a lot easier for that plastic to pull out of the mold once you've poured it. So again, that finally figured it out, and that's where I do it. Another thing that you need to make sure that you do when you do this is actually going to be a 2-layered mold or a 2-piece mold, so that way we have full body, is you want to make sure you have a little dowel or a little rod or a little piece of pencil, whatever, to actually put into the first layer of your plaster. Because what that does is when you go to put the hot plastic in for this new lure, it will actually go in, you'll be able to push all the plastic in, but as the plastic shrinks, you need to add a little more plastic in there, so that way it doesn't create an air cavity in the lure itself, because as the plastic shrinks, it'll pull the plastic in and create air, and you don't want that. So what I do is you put this little piece in there, and as it shrinks, it's shrinking into this, but not into the plastic lure. And so with these, another reason why you have to do it 2 ways, not only with the full bodied, but I also found that when you just simply pour, you hold the mold vertically and you pour in the plastic, there wasn't enough pressure to get it all the way through the tail. So I did need to buy a plastic injector to put enough pressure to get that plastic all the way into the mold to create the full tail. Otherwise, it's like half a tail and it's worthless. So that being said, let's start mixing the plaster. With the plaster, again, if you've never used it or you're new to it, I would definitely follow the instructions on the package to get the right plaster to water ratio. But for me, since I've been doing them for quite a while now, I just basically, just do it by look and feel. So with this first layer, you want it to be not very liquidy, but almost like a creamy peanut butter, so you could set the lure in properly. And then the top layer is a lot more fluid, and because you don't need the lure to rest into it. But I'll just show you right now, and we'll get started. You definitely want to mix it all thoroughly. Try not to breathe in the plaster dust that comes up after you start mixing. Okay, that looks pretty good right there. All right, so we're done with that. So now we'll go to pour. And as you can see in here, I've got 4 layers thick of Legos. 1, 2, 3, 4. And so with the first layer, what I try to do is get it to be about at the top of this second layer here before I put the lure in. That way I have equal amounts of plaster on the bottom part of the mold and equal part on the top. So that way the lure is centered in the mold. So go ahead and pour all this. Perfect. All right, see how now that the plaster is almost flattened out, you could see it's right at the top of that second layer of Legos. Now I'm just bumping this a little bit to get as much of the bubbles out, or have the bubbles rise to the top as possible, because big bubbles can definitely ruin it. Small bubbles, not so much. Again, you don't need this to be perfect, you just need it to be functional so you could use it and catch fish. Just blowing all the some of these larger bubbles out. Okay, cool. Now, again, with this little dowel, what I'm going to do so the plaster doesn't stick to it, I'm going to take a little bit of oil and coat the entire thing. Now I'll go ahead and stick this into the plaster, about, again, halfway down. Pretty much in the center of this part right here. Push it down to where it's halfway in the resin, halfway sticking out. The top. Okay. Then, as I noted before, you want to take the lure and don't put it straight down, don't put it upside down, but we want to put it by the side. So we're going to take it, you put the front right up against that dowel, and just I just let it drop right in. Get that tail in there straight. Push it down a little bit, make sure it's equal parts in the plaster and equal parts above it. Okay, as you can see, half in, half out. Make sure that dowel is wanting to float up on me. I don't want it to float up on me. So as the resin hardens, I'm just gonna push this down a little bit, make sure it gets stuck right there with that lure. But as you can see, the lure is half in the plaster. The other half, when we pour it over the top, it'll cover it completely, and then that'll be a completed mold. So we'll give this an hour, and then we'll come back and show you how to do the top piece. Okay, so it's been an hour. We're ready to get ready to pour the top layer of this mold. Now, in order for the second part to work, you have to have some type of oil or release agent and some indentations in here so that the mold can lock in place. So what I do is I'll just take a drill bit, and I'm going to drill 6 holes in here, just again so that way the two pieces of the mold can lock together and not slide apart. So I'll just do, and again, they don't have to be holes, just small indentations. I just do 6. Okay, so those little indentations are done. So you can see they're not very big, just enough for the two pieces to have something to latch together with, or to sit snugly against when you go to pour your plastic in. Now, in order for the top layer of plaster not to stick to that bottom layer, you need to add some type of release. And so I just use just furniture oil. I'm sure you could use like vegetable oil or olive oil or something like that. You just need to have a thin layer of oil down here to, again, prevent that next or top layer of plaster from sticking to the bottom one. Because if it does, it's, you're going to have it's not going to open up. You're not going to have a mold. You're just going to have just a solid piece of plaster. So I just do, again, a really, really thin layer of oil on this. You don't need to do the lure, again, because that's not going to stick anyways, but definitely get that little dowel piece or wood, whatever you have in there. Get around everywhere, get around the tail. You can see how flimsy that tail is. It's not, that's why the other way of doing the mold with it set down straight in doesn't work well. Okay, get the oil into these spots. Get around the lure. Okay. That's good for that. Now we'll just make sure we get the holes good. Make sure there's oil in the holes. Okay, great. All done. So now all we need to do, last step, is pour. So what we'll do is with this second batch of plaster, this definitely needs to be more fluid than the first layer, because you want to make sure that it fills in all the cracks, all the little crevices in the lure. And if it's not fairly liquidy, it's not going to get in there, and you're just going to have just a bunch of air bubbles in there, and it's not going to fill the lure completely as you want, or as you see the original. So we'll go ahead and stir this first. Get this all ready. And try to make sure there's as little to no large clumps as possible. Okay, let's see. I need a little more liquidy than that, a little more loose or watery. Again, you want it watery so that way, again, it fills in all the voids, and you don't, and when you have it liquidy or watery running like this, that tail is free to sit in its natural state, or natural state. So you don't want it to, you don't want the thick plaster to bend the tail down. You just want it to be able to move freely and take its natural place. All right, that's good. All right, so we'll go ahead and do that. Now we'll go ahead and pour, and watch how nicely this fills in. Beautiful. Now you might have seen the tail move a little bit, that's perfectly fine, because what we're gonna, and this is again why you want more watery plaster than you had with the first one. So now, same with the first one. Now we'll keep tapping, we'll start tapping this a bit, vibrating it, and you'll see all the larger bubbles come up, which is good. That's what we want. And by doing this, the tail is getting able to take its natural placement as it did before with, see, there's a large bubble coming up, bubbles coming up over here, over here. That's what you want. You want to get rid of all these large ones, all the spots where there was voids, all that. The vibration is causing the plaster to seep into all those voids and holes and cracks. Looks good, looking good. Not many holes at all. There's one more coming up right here, and I think right there. Yep. Do this for a little bit. Get those last two big bubbles out. There. You can blow them out a little one, or use a blowtorch, heat gun, whatever, to get those bubbles out. Just get them to pop. Oh, there's one more coming up on the left side of it right there. All right, cool. So that's all done. That's it. Now what we'll do is, again, let that set for an hour or so, let it harden, and we'll come back and take it apart, take everything apart, and see our new full-bodied two-piece mold. All right, been over an hour. Moment of truth. Let's see how this thing turned out. I have a feeling it turned out all right. All right, so again, you could either take the Lego pieces apart, Or what I do is I just kind of shimmy them, separate the pieces a little bit. So you can see out when I spread it, there's a little gap there. See what's over here, a little gap. Now if the corners crack or come apart, I don't worry too much about it because it really doesn't matter. Then I just kind of shimmy it out. So you can see the corner break in there. Again, really doesn't matter to me. If you want it to be cleaner, you can just take the Lego pieces off or disconnect all the Lego pieces. But there's the mold itself. Now, let's see what we got inside. Up. Look at that. Perfect, nearly perfect, top and bottom. So there you go, there's the mold. Now this little piece is sticking out here because of that little piece in here. Actually, sorry, let me do it in the right direction. So there's that piece that matches up with this little piece right here. Just means it didn't go in the hole properly, but that's okay. And then you can usually just pop this dowel out. I'll open it up just a little bit, get some of the plaster away from the edges. Again, this is why you oiled it. And it should, I say should, pop right out. There you go. Alright, there you go. Now here's again why you wanted these little divots in here. So when you connect it to go to pour the plastic in, it doesn't shift at all. It's just locked into place. Now what you do is you just let this sit for about 24 hours to completely harden. And then what I'll do is I'll take the drill bit again and I'll go into here and I'll just kind of twist it to open the hole a little bit bigger, and then open this a little bit more so it's wide enough to have the injector hole fit. So you can see it doesn't fit right now, so I'll open that hole so the injector fits in. If you don't use the injector and you just pour the plastic in, gravity isn't enough to get the plastic before it cools down into the little thin tail area. So that's why you need the injector to kind of give it some little extra oomph and push it in there. And then once it pushes it in there, then you're left with basically a perfect replica of the original bait that you had in there. Hope this was helpful. Hope you enjoyed watching it. If you have any questions, let me know, or any comments, let me know. Otherwise, get to making some lures and catch some fish. Okay, so a little bit of extra bonus content here. Little word of advice or a little hint. In an effort to be as efficient as possible and spend the least amount of time making lures and actually making them as fast as you can, what I do is I'll take my molds, clamp them together, melt my plastic, get it all in the injector, and then pump like 4 to 5 lures at a time instead of one, putting it back in, reheating it, because what I have found is that even when the injector is hot or heated up, which I strongly recommend, is heating. When you get one of these, heat it up first, boil it in water or whatever, then let it dry. Always make sure to wear gloves because it's going to be really hot. But the hotter this is, warmer this is, the slower the hot plastic, when you suck it up into there, the slower it will harden. giving you more use time. So in order to, again, maximize my time, I take all my molds, I'll clamp them all together, have the plastic melted, suck it into this, and then do 4 or 5 lures at a time. That way it's efficient. Do as many as you possibly can, and then when I'm done pouring those first or squirting those ones, I'll get the plastic out of here, put it into the cup. By that time, go through the process of remelting it. These will have set. Take these out, put these in ice water, clamp them together again, suck that, and go through the whole process. Usually I do about 3 or 4 sets at a time when I do it, so I get about 15 lures per session or time I'm doing this, whatever you want to call it. So again, just a way to maximize your efficiency and spend as little time in between pours as possible so you can get as many lures done in a shorter amount of time. Hope that helps. Get out there and get fishing.